Marcus wiped the sweat from his forehead as he stepped out of the taxi on the busy street corner. The summer heat in downtown Chicago was brutal, and his expensive suit was already wrinkled from the long flight. He had been traveling for nearly 14 hours, flying back from a business meeting in London where he had just closed a major deal for his entertainment company. The tall, muscular man stretched his arms and looked up at the gleaming glass tower before him. The Grand Plaza Hotel stood 40 stories high, its windows reflecting the afternoon sun like mirrors. Marcus had specifically chosen this hotel because he had heard wonderful things about their service and luxury amenities. After the exhausting trip, he was looking forward to a hot shower, room service, and maybe a good night's sleep. Marcus grabbed his single black duffel bag from the taxi and walked through the revolving glass doors into the hotel lobby. The interior was even more impressive than the outside. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceiling, and the marble floors were so polished they looked like ice. Expensive artwork decorated the walls, and soft classical music played in the background. Behind the front desk stood a young woman named Jessica. She was 24 years old, blonde, and wore the hotel's standard navy blue uniform with a gold name tag. Jessica had been working at the Grand Plaza for only 6 months, and she took great pride in her position. She believed that working at such an upscale hotel made her important, and she often looked down on guests who didn't meet her standards of wealth and sophistication. When Jessica saw Marcus approaching the desk, she immediately judged him based on his appearance. His suit was wrinkled, his hair was messy from the long flight, and he was carrying only one simple bag instead of expensive luggage. In her mind, he looked like someone who probably couldn't afford to stay at a hotel like the Grand Plaza. Marcus walked up to the marble front desk with a tired but friendly smile. "Good afternoon," he said politely. "I have a reservation under the name Marcus Johnson." Jessica looked at him with barely concealed disgust. She didn't bother to return his smile and instead gave him a cold, professional stare. "Do you have identification and a credit card?" she asked in a sharp tone, as if she was already expecting problems. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his wallet. He handed over his driver's license and a simple black credit card. Jessica examined the ID with exaggerated care, holding it up to the light as if she suspected it might be fake. "Marcus Johnson," she read aloud, her voice dripping with skepticism. "And what type of room did you book?" "I believe it was the executive suite on the 35th floor," Marcus replied calmly, though he was beginning to notice the woman's hostile attitude. Jessica's eyebrows shot up in surprise and disbelief. She looked at Marcus again, taking in his wrinkled clothes and tired appearance. "The executive suite?" she repeated with a laugh. "Sir, I think there might be some mistake. The executive suite costs $1,500 per night. Are you sure you didn't book one of our standard rooms?" Marcus felt his patience beginning to wear thin, but he maintained his composure. "No, I'm quite sure it was the executive suite. Could you please check your computer?" Jessica sighed dramatically and began typing on her keyboard with unnecessary force, making it clear that she considered this a waste of her time. "Let me see here," she muttered, shaking her head. Marcus Johnson. Oh, here it is." She stared at the computer screen for a moment, and her expression changed slightly. The reservation was indeed for the executive suite, and it showed that it had been prepaid in full. But instead of apologizing for her attitude, Jessica became even more suspicious. "This is very strange," she said, looking at Marcus with narrowed eyes. "This reservation was made with a corporate account, but you don't look like you work for any major company. Are you sure this reservation is actually yours?" Marcus could hardly believe what he was hearing. "Excuse me? Of course it's my reservation. I made it myself 3 days ago." Jessica leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. "Sir, I'm going to need to see some additional identification. We've had problems with people using stolen credit cards or fake reservations, and I need to make sure everything is legitimate before I can give you a room." Other guests in the lobby began to notice the commotion. A few well-dressed business people turned to stare, and Marcus could feel their eyes on him. He was embarrassed and frustrated, but he tried to remain calm. "What additional identification do you need?" he asked. "I've already given you my driver's license and credit card. Do you have a business card? A letter from your employer? Something that proves you can actually afford to stay here?" Jessica asked with a smirk. Marcus reached into his wallet again and pulled out a simple business card that read, "Marcus Johnson, CEO, MJ Entertainment Group." Jessica took the card and examined it with the same suspicious attitude she had shown his ID. "MJ Entertainment Group?" she said with a laugh. "I've never heard of this company. This could be a fake business card that anyone could print at home." "It's a real company," Marcus said, his voice becoming firmer. "We specialize in music production and entertainment management." Jessica shook her head and handed the card back to him. "Sir, I'm sorry, but I cannot give you access to our executive suite based on this information. The executive suite is reserved for our most important and wealthy clients. Perhaps you would be more comfortable at one of the budget hotels down the street?" Marcus could not believe the level of disrespect he was experiencing. He had stayed at luxury hotels all over the world, and he had never been treated like this. "I demand to speak with your manager," he said, his voice rising slightly. "The manager is busy right now," Jessica replied with fake sympathy. "But I can offer you a standard room for $200 per night if you can provide a valid credit card that I can verify." "You already have my credit card," Marcus pointed out. "Yes, but I need to run some additional verification checks," Jessica said. "Sometimes people use credit cards that aren't actually theirs, if you know what I mean." The implication was clear, and Marcus felt his anger building. Jessica was essentially accusing him of credit card theft based solely on his appearance. He looked around the lobby and noticed that other guests were watching the scene with interest, some of them whispering to each other. "Fine," Marcus said through gritted teeth. "Run whatever checks you need to run, but I want that executive suite that I paid for." Jessica picked up his credit card and made a show of examining it carefully. She then walked over to a different computer terminal and began typing slowly, deliberately, taking her time. After several minutes, she returned with the same smug expression on her face. "I'm sorry, sir, but there seems to be some kind of problem with your credit card. The system is showing some irregular activity, and I cannot authorize such a large charge." Marcus knew this was impossible. He had used the same credit card just hours earlier to pay for his taxi, and he had more than enough money in his account to cover the hotel stay. "What kind of irregular activity?" he demanded. "I cannot share specific details for security reasons," Jessica said with fake professionalism. "But I would recommend that you contact your credit card company to resolve these issues. In the meantime, I can offer you our standard room if you have cash to pay up front." Marcus realized that this woman was simply making up excuses to deny him service. He had encountered discrimination before, but never in such a blatant and public way. He looked around the lobby again and saw that more people were watching now, including hotel staff members who seemed uncomfortable with the situation, but were not intervening. "This is ridiculous," Marcus said loudly enough for others to hear. "I have a confirmed reservation, I've provided valid identification, and my credit card is perfectly fine. You are discriminating against me based on my appearance?" Jessica's face turned red with anger. "Sir, I am not discriminating against anyone. I am simply following hotel policy to verify that our guests can afford our services. If you cannot provide adequate proof of your ability to pay, then I cannot help you." "I want to speak with the general manager right now," Marcus demanded. "As I told you, the manager is busy," Jessica replied. "But I can have security escort you out if you continue to cause a disturbance." Marcus looked around the lobby one more time. He could see the judgment in people's faces. the way they were looking at him like he was some kind of criminal or con artist. He had worked hard his entire life to build his business and earn respect, and now this young woman was treating him like he was nobody. But Marcus had learned long ago that sometimes the best response to disrespect was patience. He had a feeling that this situation would resolve itself in ways that Jessica could never imagine. He decided to play along with her game for a little while longer, curious to see just how far she would take her arrogant behavior. "All right," he said calmly, surprising Jessica with his sudden change in tone. "If you cannot give me the executive suite I reserved, what exactly can you offer me?" Jessica seemed pleased that he was backing down. "Well, as I mentioned, we have standard rooms available for $200 per night. They're quite nice, really. They have cable television and a small bathroom." Marcus nodded slowly. "And these rooms are available right now?" "Yes, sir. I can get you checked in immediately if you can pay cash up front for at least one night." Marcus reached into his wallet and pulled out $300 in cash. Jessica's eyes lit up when she saw the money, and her attitude became slightly more friendly. "Wonderful," she said, taking the cash and counting it carefully. "This will cover one night in our standard room plus taxes and fees. You'll be staying in room 412 on the 4th floor. She handed him a plastic key card and a small folder with hotel information. "The elevators are just around the corner. Checkout time is 11 a.m. tomorrow morning." Marcus took the key and nodded. "Thank you for your help," he said with a mysterious smile that made Jessica slightly uncomfortable. As Marcus walked toward the elevators, Jessica felt proud of herself. She had successfully prevented someone who clearly didn't belong at the Grand Plaza from taking advantage of their luxury services. In her mind, she had done her job perfectly and protected the hotel's reputation. What Jessica didn't know was that Marcus Johnson was much more than just another hotel guest, and tomorrow morning would bring surprises that would change everything at the Grand Plaza Hotel. Marcus woke up early the next morning in his small standard room on the 4th floor. The room was clean but basic, with a single bed, a small television, and a tiny bathroom that barely had enough space to turn around. It was nothing like the executive suite he had paid for, but he had slept reasonably well despite the circumstances. He took a hot shower and put on a fresh suit from his duffel bag. This one was perfectly pressed and clearly expensive, made from fine Italian wool in a deep navy blue. He paired it with a crisp white shirt, a silk tie, and polished leather shoes that probably cost more than most people made in a month. Marcus looked at himself in the small mirror and smiled. Today was going to be very interesting. Meanwhile, downstairs in the hotel lobby, Jessica was starting her second shift at the front desk. She had worked until late the previous evening and was back early this morning because one of her co-workers had called in sick. Jessica was tired and slightly irritated about having to work extra hours, but she needed the money. She was organizing paperwork behind the front desk when her supervisor, Robert Martinez, approached with a concerned expression on his face. Robert was the front desk manager, a man in his 40s who had worked at the Grand Plaza for over 10 years. "Jessica," Robert said quietly, "I need to talk to you about something that happened yesterday evening." Jessica looked up from her papers with a confused expression. "What do you mean?" "I received a phone call last night from the corporate office," Robert continued, lowering his voice. "They said there was some kind of incident yesterday involving a guest reservation, and they want me to investigate." Jessica felt a small flutter of nervousness in her stomach, but she tried to appear calm. "I handled all the check-ins professionally yesterday. I don't know what they could be concerned about." Robert pulled out a piece of paper with some notes on it. "They mentioned a guest named Marcus Johnson. Do you remember him?" Jessica's heart skipped a beat, but she maintained her composure. "Yes, I remember him. He came in claiming to have a reservation for the executive suite, but there were problems with his credit card verification. I followed proper procedure and offered him a standard room instead." Problems with his credit card? Robert asked, raising an eyebrow. What kind of problems? Jessica began to feel defensive. The system showed irregular activity, and he couldn't provide adequate proof that he could afford the executive suite. He looked suspicious. I was just protecting the hotel's interests. Robert stared at her for a long moment. Jessica, I ran a check on that reservation this morning. Marcus Johnson's reservation was fully prepaid through our premium corporate account system. His credit card showed no irregular activity whatsoever. In fact, the account he used has a credit limit higher than most people's annual salary. Jessica felt her face growing hot. But I checked the system myself. There were definitely problems. No, there weren't, Robert said firmly. And what's more concerning is that I spoke with several other staff members who witnessed the interaction. They said you treated Mr. Johnson with disrespect and made assumptions about him based on his appearance. Before Jessica could respond, the elevator doors opened and Marcus stepped into the lobby. He had transformed completely from the tired, wrinkled traveler of the day before. Now he looked every inch the successful businessman he truly was, with his perfectly tailored suit and confident demeanor. Jessica watched in horror as Marcus walked directly toward the front desk. She hoped he would simply check out quietly and leave, but instead, he approached with purpose and determination. Good morning, Marcus said politely to Robert, completely ignoring Jessica. I'm Marcus Johnson. I believe you've been expecting me. Robert's eyes widened in recognition. Mr. Johnson. Yes, sir, absolutely. I'm Robert Martinez, the front desk manager. I sincerely apologize for any inconvenience you experienced yesterday. We take these matters very seriously. Jessica stood frozen behind the desk, watching the interaction with growing dread. She noticed that other hotel employees were beginning to gather nearby, as if they knew something important was happening. I appreciate your concern, Marcus said calmly. But I think there are some larger issues we need to discuss. Is there somewhere private where we can talk? Robert nodded eagerly. Of course, sir. We can use the manager's office, right this way. As they began to walk away from the front desk, Marcus turned back and looked directly at Jessica for the first time that morning. Miss Jessica, he said, reading her name tag, I think you should join us for this conversation. Jessica felt her knees go weak. I'm supposed to stay at the front desk. Another employee can cover for you, Marcus said firmly. It wasn't a request. It was a command. Robert quickly called over another front desk clerk to take Jessica's place, and the three of them walked to a small office behind the lobby. Marcus closed the door behind them and gestured for the others to sit down. Now then, Marcus began. I think we need to have an honest discussion about what happened yesterday. Jessica tried to speak up in her defense. Mr. Johnson, I was just following hotel policy. We have to verify that guests can afford our premium services and... Marcus held up his hand to silence her. Let me ask you something, Jessica. What exactly made you think I couldn't afford the executive suite? Jessica hesitated, realizing that any answer she gave would sound terrible. Well, your clothes were wrinkled and you only had one bag and... And what? Marcus pressed. What else? Jessica couldn't bring herself to say what she was really thinking. She had judged him based on his race and appearance, making assumptions about his wealth and status without any real evidence. Marcus continued, his voice remaining calm but firm. Jessica, I want you to understand something. I've built my business from nothing. I started with just a few $1,000s and a dream, and I've worked 20-hour days for years to get where I am today. I've faced discrimination before, but what you did yesterday was particularly disappointing. Robert looked mortified. Mr. Johnson, please know that her behavior does not represent the values of the Grand Plaza Hotel. We pride ourselves on treating all guests with equal respect and dignity. Marcus nodded. I appreciate that, Robert. But I think Jessica needs to understand the full scope of what happened yesterday. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. After scrolling through it for a moment, he found what he was looking for and showed the screen to both Robert and Jessica. "This is the email confirmation for my executive suite reservation," he said. "As you can see, it was booked through MJ Entertainment Group's corporate account. Robert, I believe you've already verified that the payment went through without any problems." Robert nodded, looking increasingly uncomfortable. Marcus put his phone away and looked directly at Jessica. "Now, let me ask you something else. In all your time working here, have you ever refused service to a white guest who looked tired after a long flight?" Jessica's face turned bright red. That's not... I treat everyone the same." "Do you?" Marcus asked. "Because yesterday, you accused me of potentially using a stolen credit card. You questioned whether I could afford to stay here, and you suggested I would be more comfortable at a budget hotel. You did all of this based solely on how I looked when I walked through those doors." The room fell silent. Jessica stared at her hands, unable to meet Marcus's gaze. She knew he was right, and she knew that her behavior had been inexcusable. Robert cleared his throat nervously. "Mr. Johnson, I want to assure you that we will address this situation appropriately. Jessica will receive additional training on our customer service policies and—" Marcus interrupted him gently. "Robert, I appreciate your concern, but I don't think you understand the full situation yet." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder filled with documents. "You see, there's something I haven't told you about myself." Marcus opened the folder and spread several papers across the desk. Robert leaned forward to look at them, and his face went completely white. "These are ownership documents," Marcus explained. 3 months ago, MJ Entertainment Group purchased the Grand Plaza Hotel as part of our expansion into the hospitality industry. As of last week, I am officially the new owner of this hotel." Jessica felt like she might faint. She stared at the documents in disbelief, unable to process what she was hearing. Robert stammered, You're the new owner? But we were told that the new ownership group would be visiting sometime this month for introductions?" "That's correct," Marcus said. "I decided to make an unannounced visit first to see how the hotel operates when the staff doesn't know they're being watched. I wanted to get an honest assessment of our customer service standards." Marcus looked at Jessica, who was now visibly shaking. "Unfortunately, what I discovered was that at least one of our employees is comfortable discriminating against guests based on their appearance and race." "Mr. Johnson," Jessica whispered, "I had no idea. I'm so sorry." Marcus studied her for a long moment. "Jessica, let me ask you something. Are you sorry because you realized you were wrong about treating people with respect? Or are you sorry because you found out I'm your boss?" Jessica couldn't answer. She knew that her apology was mainly motivated by fear for her job, rather than genuine remorse for her behavior. Marcus gathered up his documents and put them back in the folder. "I'm going to be staying here for the next week to observe operations and meet with department heads. Robert, I'll need you to arrange meetings with all the senior staff." "Of course, sir," Robert said quickly. "Whatever you need." Marcus stood up and walked toward the door, then paused and turned back to Jessica. "As for you, Jessica, we'll discuss your future with the company later this week. For now, I want you to think very carefully about how you treat people and whether this job is really right for you." As Marcus left the office, Jessica realized that her world had just turned upside down. The guest she had humiliated and discriminated against was now her boss, and her job was almost certainly in jeopardy. But more than that, she was beginning to understand that her behavior had been truly wrong, regardless of who Marcus turned out to be. She had treated another human being with disrespect and cruelty based solely on assumptions and prejudices. The question now was whether it was too late to make things right. Over the next 3 days, news of Marcus's true identity spread throughout the Grand Plaza Hotel like wildfire. Employees whispered in hallways, gathered in break rooms, and shared shocked looks whenever they saw him walking through the lobby. Everyone wanted to know what would happen to Jessica, and many began reflecting on their own interactions with guests. Marcus spent his time meeting with department heads, reviewing financial reports, and observing daily operations. He was impressed with most aspects of the hotel's management, but noticed several areas where customer service could be improved. He also discovered that Jessica's discriminatory behavior was not an isolated incident, though it was the most blatant example he had witnessed. On Thursday afternoon, Marcus called Jessica into the same small office where they had met earlier in the week. This time, he was joined by Sarah Chen, the hotel's human resources director, and Robert Martinez. Jessica entered the room looking pale and nervous, clearly expecting the worst. "Please, sit down," Marcus said, his tone neutral but not unkind. Jessica sat across from him, her hands trembling slightly. She had barely slept since learning about Marcus's identity, and she had spent hours thinking about her behavior and its consequences. Marcus opened a file folder and reviewed some papers for a moment before speaking. "Jessica, I've spent the last few days investigating the incident that occurred when I checked in, as well as your overall performance as an employee." Jessica held her breath, waiting for what she assumed would be her termination. "I spoke with several other hotel staff members, and I also reviewed security footage from the lobby," Marcus continued. "What I found confirmed everything I experienced firsthand. Your treatment of me was discriminatory, unprofessional, and completely unacceptable." Jessica nodded, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "I know, Mr. Johnson. I've been thinking about it constantly, and I realize how wrong I was. I don't have any excuse for my behavior." Marcus studied her carefully. "Tell me, Jessica, what exactly have you been thinking about?" Jessica took a shaky breath before responding. "I've been thinking about how I would have felt if someone had treated me the way I treated you. I've been thinking about all the assumptions I made about you based on how you looked, and how wrong those assumptions were. And I've been thinking about whether I've done this to other guests without even realizing it." Sarah Chen leaned forward slightly. "And what conclusions have you reached?" "I think I have," Jessica said quietly. "I think I've been judging people based on their appearance my whole life, and I never realized how hurtful and wrong that was until now. Working at a fancy hotel like this made me feel important, and I think I started believing that I was better than other people." Marcus nodded. "That's an honest assessment. Now let me ask you something else. If I weren't the owner of this hotel, if I were just another guest, would you be having these same realizations?" Jessica considered the question carefully. "I want to say yes, but I'm not sure. I think I might have just gotten defensive and made excuses. Finding out who you really are forced me to confront my behavior in a way that I probably wouldn't have otherwise." Marcus appreciated her honesty. "At least you're being truthful about that." Sarah Chen consulted her notes. "Jessica, we've reviewed your employment file, and this is your first major disciplinary issue. However, the nature of the incident is quite serious. Discrimination against guests based on race, appearance, or perceived social status is grounds for immediate termination." Jessica nodded, accepting her fate. "I understand. I know I deserve to be fired." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering his options. He could terminate Jessica immediately, which would send a clear message to other employees that discrimination would not be tolerated. On the other hand, he had been impressed by her apparent genuine remorse and self-reflection. "Jessica," he said finally, "I want to tell you a story about my own experiences with discrimination." Jessica looked up, surprised by this unexpected turn in the conversation. "When I was starting my business 15 years ago, I went to a bank to apply for a small loan," Marcus began. "I had a solid business plan, good credit, and sufficient collateral. But the loan officer took one look at me and decided I wasn't worth his time. He barely glanced at my application before telling me that my business idea wasn't viable and that I should consider getting a regular job instead. Marcus paused, remembering the humiliation and frustration of that day. I left that bank feeling angry and discouraged, but I didn't give up. I found another bank, got the loan I needed, and built my business into what it is today. Jessica listened intently, beginning to understand the parallel between Marcus's experience and what she had put him through. Now, here's the interesting part of the story, Marcus continued. 2 years ago, that same bank approached my company about becoming their exclusive entertainment industry lender. They wanted my business badly, because by then I was successful enough that they couldn't afford to ignore me. Marcus leaned forward slightly. I had a choice to make. I could have taken my business elsewhere and never dealt with them again. Or I could have used the opportunity to create positive change. What did you do? Jessica asked quietly. I agreed to work with them, but only on the condition that they implement comprehensive anti-discrimination training for all their employees and establish clear policies for fair lending practices. That bank is now one of the most inclusive financial institutions in the city. Sarah, Chen, and Robert exchanged glances, beginning to understand where Marcus was heading with this story. The point is, Marcus said, sometimes people make mistakes because they haven't been properly educated or because they've never been forced to confront their own prejudices. The question is whether they're willing to learn and change when given the opportunity. Jessica felt a small spark of hope but tried not to get ahead of herself. Marcus reached into his briefcase and pulled out another document. Jessica, I'm not going to fire you today, but I am going to give you a choice. Jessica's eyes widened in surprise. Option 1, Marcus continued, you can resign immediately with a neutral reference and will part ways with no hard feelings. Option 2, you can stay with the company under a very specific set of conditions. What conditions? Jessica asked, hardly daring to hope. Marcus handed her the document. You would be demoted from your current position and placed in a probationary status for 6 months. During that time, you would work in various departments throughout the hotel, housekeeping, room service, maintenance, and customer service, to gain a better understanding of how the entire operation works and how different types of people contribute to our success. Jessica scanned the document quickly, trying to process all the information. Additionally, Marcus continued, you would be required to complete 40 hours of diversity and sensitivity training, both online and in person. You would also participate in monthly meetings with me to discuss what you're learning and how your perspective is changing. Jessica looked up from the document with tears in her eyes. You would give me another chance after what I did? Everyone deserves a chance to learn and grow, Marcus said. But I want to be very clear about something. This is not just about giving you another opportunity. If you choose to stay, you'll be expected to become an ambassador for the values we want to promote at this hotel. That means treating every guest and every coworker with respect and dignity, regardless of how they look, how they dress, or where they come from. Robert Martinez spoke up. Jessica, you should also know that Mr. Johnson has decided to implement new customer service training for all employees. What happened with you has highlighted some areas where we can all improve. Marcus nodded. We're going to make sure that every employee understands our expectations and has the tools they need to provide excellent service to all guests. Jessica wiped tears from her eyes and looked at the document again. Mr. Johnson, I don't understand why you're willing to give me this chance, but I want you to know that I won't waste it. I want to be better than I was. That's all anyone can ask for, Marcus replied. But remember, this is just the beginning. Real change takes time and consistent effort. Sarah Chen handed Jessica a pen. Take your time to think about it. You don't have to decide right now. Jessica shook her head. I don't need time to think about it. I want to stay, and I want to do better. She signed the document without hesitation. Over the following months, Jessica worked harder than she had ever worked in her life. She spent time in every department of the hotel, learning about the challenges and contributions of each role. She discovered that many of her co-workers came from different backgrounds and had fascinating stories about their lives and experiences. The housekeeping staff taught her about attention to detail and the importance of creating a welcoming environment for guests. The maintenance crew showed her how much skill and knowledge was required to keep a complex building running smoothly. The kitchen staff demonstrated the artistry and precision that went into creating memorable dining experiences. Most importantly, Jessica began to see her co-workers and guests as individual human beings rather than making snap judgments based on appearances. During her monthly meetings with Marcus, she shared what she was learning and how her perspective was changing. Marcus was impressed by her genuine commitment to growth and her willingness to acknowledge her past mistakes without making excuses. 6 months later, Jessica was promoted back to the front desk, but this time as a senior associate with additional responsibilities for training new employees. Her job was to ensure that every new hire understood the hotel's commitment to treating all guests with equal respect and dignity. On her first day back at the front desk, Jessica noticed a young man approaching the check-in counter. He was wearing casual clothes, carrying a backpack, and looked like he might be a college student traveling on a budget. The old Jessica might have assumed he was in the wrong hotel or looking for directions. Instead, Jessica smiled warmly and said, "Good afternoon. Welcome to the Grand Plaza Hotel. How can I help you today?" The young man smiled back. "Hi, I have a reservation under the name David Chen. I'm here for a business conference." As Jessica looked up his reservation, she saw that he had booked one of their most expensive suites and was staying for an entire week. She thought about how easily she could have made the same mistake she had made with Marcus, judging someone based on their appearance, rather than treating them with the respect every guest deserved. "Mr. Chen, I have your reservation right here," Jessica said professionally. "You're staying in our penthouse suite on the top floor. It's one of our most beautiful rooms, with an amazing view of the city." As she processed his check-in, Jessica reflected on how much her life had changed since that day when she had discriminated against Marcus. She had learned that everyone has value and dignity, regardless of how they look or where they come from. She had also learned that making mistakes doesn't have to define a person, as long as they're willing to learn and grow from those mistakes. Marcus, who happened to be walking through the lobby at that moment, observed the interaction from a distance. He smiled as he watched Jessica treat the young guest with warmth and professionalism. It had taken time and effort, but she had truly transformed into the kind of employee he wanted representing his hotel. The Grand Plaza Hotel had also changed under Marcus's ownership. The new training programs and policies had created a culture where discrimination was not tolerated and where every guest could expect to be treated with respect. The hotel's reputation for excellent customer service had improved dramatically, and they were now known throughout the city as a place where everyone was welcome. As Marcus continued through the lobby, he felt proud of what they had accomplished together. Sometimes the most powerful way to create change is not through punishment, but through education, patience, and the belief that people can grow beyond their worst moments. Jessica had become living proof that even the most disappointing situations could lead to positive transformation when people were willing to do the hard work of changing themselves.